$50 new spending money for luxuries, you know, like food and clothing and health care and things like that. What does this new perspective mean for regions? First, the federal grants and tax credits are likely to reflect these approaches. And I don't have to tell you how profoundly that will impact as you build or rebuild your communities. It also means that places that are organized to look at their information as a region are much more likely to see the whole picture and be able to mobilize to do something about it. From HUD's perspective, this means that all housing projects will have to demonstrate their impact on vehicle miles traveled and emission reduction targets if they're using any federal money whatsoever. And everyone says, well, most housing projects don't, but in fact they do when you start talking about roads and water and sewer lines and loan guarantees for such things and so on. It means that making transit-oriented areas much more competitive, or perhaps communities that can demonstrate lower household transportation costs, meaning communities with either transit or walkabilities, would become far more competitive. Now, these same standards are going to be applied across the board to all agencies there at the moment: transportation, housing, and environmental protection. We are, by the way, having a conference where we're bringing the states together at the end of this month. In fact, Tennessee, we represent both the Department of Transportation and Department of Environment to work on this in terms of how it will be implemented in the state. Now, we've all been reminded several times in the last year, obviously, that there's another branch of government, and the Congress is very much involved in this as well. The three pieces of legislation, which I will not go through in detail, but Bridget actually has some sheets that has the details on this, but shows what is occurring. And the most recent introduction is what we call Senator Dodd's Livable Communities Act, and that act provides $400 million over the next 4 years specifically to help with the comprehensive planning, the very things that you're talking about, the very things you're doing, transit planning and so on. It also provides $3.7 billion to start implementing these plans. There's also something called the Clean T, which actually stands for Clean, Low Emission, Affordable New Transportation Efficiency Act, which you see why they call it Clean T. But anyway, it sets aside 10% of the proceeds from the auction of the carbon emissions allowances to fund low greenhouse gas transportation fund. Now, a lot of you probably said, what in the world did he just say? The new cap and trade is going to produce one heck of a lot of money, regardless of what form it comes out. One heck of a lot of money. And 10% of that will go into a special fund, and the special fund will be eligible to state and local governments for programs including transit, including walkability, including just bringing people together that reduces further carbon emissions. The Clean T funding will be available for transit, for bicycle, for pedestrian projects, as well as simply transportation management. The third major program coming about is the Transportation Reauthorization. It's supposed to be done this year, but no one expected it to. It's never been done on time, so it's going to clearly be next year. But this is the reauthorization of all the transportation funding from the federal government. Congressman Oberstar, who chairs the House committee and has been the major driving influence on this, has released an outline of a bill that would do a number of significant things affecting the work that you're doing right here. It increases the proportion of funding for transit from 18% to 22%. Given the current demand, we think this is still much too low, and are working with the coalition all across the country to increase that. We think a 22% should be at a minimum a floor for transit funding. Another highlight of that House draft, and almost certain to be in it, is an increase in the metropolitan sub-allocation, or the money that the state is required to pass through to MPOs. The current requirement is the state must do 62.5% of the surface transportation fund in an MPO area. The draft increases that to 80%, and in addition, puts some discretionary money aside specifically to go right to the MPOs. So you will have direct allocations to use here through the MPO, not through the state, for transit, for walkability, or whatever it is. Bridget also has, I brought copies of the summary of what we call Transportation for America, but the changes that this nationwide coalition is pushing, and a good number of them, in fact, are likely to go through. Let me just emphasize two quick points as I wrap this up. One is we talked about gas at $4 a gallon and what it's likely to mean. Gasoline is definitely going to go back up to $4 a gallon within a year or two of the end of the worldwide recession, just because of demand. I mean, no one is denying this at all. Secondly, though, a number of very authoritative sources quoted in the Wall Street Journal, certainly not a bastion of liberalism, have projected that within 5 or 6 years after that, that the gas prices are likely to be $7 a gallon or greater. Now you have to think, okay, if this means within a decade we're looking at $7 a gallon gasoline, what does it mean for the region? What does it mean for the families and businesses in the region? And what does it mean for the region's competitiveness under those circumstances? I had dinner last night with some business leaders here, and one of the questions we were talking about, what would it do to the wage structure if families had to be paid enough, obviously, to offset $7 a gallon in order to get the gasoline? Or one of the alternatives is they don't use as much because of changes in transit and changes of location decision. I was in Martinsburg, West Virginia, speaking last year when the gas was $4 a gallon. The number of people there who had bought their homes and traveled back and forth to the Washington, D.C. area or to the Baltimore area for the new home buyers was staggering. 140 miles round trip at $4 a gallon. Some were now paying more for gasoline per month than they were for their mortgage. That, by the way, that county is also one of the highest foreclosure counties now in the country. I could easily spend the next several hours just going through a lot of the minutiae of these bills and the changes, but I will not do so. But I will tell you the bottom line is this. A lot of water is going to pass under the bridge before we see the new transportation bill approved. The House is inclined to move in the right direction, but clearly needs a vocal support for local constituents to see the funding opportunities in this. The new federal support for region action is unprecedented opportunity for metropolitan areas. The willingness of this national administration to understand and to support regions in their request for economic development and quality of life is really a kind of a modern revolution in federalism. I will not pretend that smart growth and regional thinking alone will solve all of our other problems. But imagine what your region will look like as you try to accommodate the 900,000 people that are projected to settle in this area over the next 2 decades. Imagine what this region will look like if you do it in the future just the way you have done it in the past. How much of the region's cultural heritage would disappear? How long would the commutes be? What will the quality of life be? And so we turn then to what if there is a better way, one that would allow you to preserve farmland, to improve mobility, to reduce costs for families, and increase economic competitiveness. I think that's a vision worth working hard to achieve, but our vision is not enough. It requires work, it requires a regional mindset, and it requires a sense of urgency moving toward implementation. Even with the federal policy and funding on your side, there is no overnight solution. And even years of regional planning will not produce immediate results. But if we change our behavior and alter our thinking about the region today and shaping a better future for tomorrow, and most importantly, doing so with a real sense of urgency. Thank you very much for the opportunity to visit with you today.